Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next installment of the Aspen Institute Socrates Program webinar series. My name is Cordell Carter, and I'm the Executive Director of the Socrates Program. Today, we have quite an interesting panel of authors, both are very distinguished in their fields, and they tackled a topic that is of great interest in American politics and has been since our beginning 244 years ago, and that is that of conspiracy. Firstly, we have no stranger to the Aspen Institute, Russ Muirhead, who is the Robert Clements Professor of Democracy and Politics at Dartmouth College. He is an author of A Lot of People Are Saying, The New Conspiracism and Assault on Democracy, printed by Princeton Press in this past year, which charts the way power seekers marshal conspiratorial fabrications to elevate themselves and at the same time degrade democratic institutions. Russ has written books on party polarization in American politics, such as The Promise of the Party and The Moral Meaning of Democracy, as in Just Work. He is also, as I said, no stranger to the Aspen Institute. In fact, he and I met at the Aspen Ideas Festival, I want to say in 2017. And since then, he has been a frequent moderator for the Socrates program all over the country. Prior to teaching at Dartmouth, Russ taught at Harvard, Williams College, and the University of Texas at Austin. His distinguished co-author, Nancy Rosenblum, is the Harvard University Senator Joseph Clark Professor of Ethics and Politics and Government. A Lot of People Are Saying is a book she co-authored with Russ, but she's also wrote Good Neighbors, A Democracy of Everyday Life in America, which was published by Princeton University Press in 2016. On the Side of Angels, An Appreciation of Parties and Friendship, which received the Walter Channing Cabot Fellow Award from Harvard in 2010. Both of these folks have tremendous scholarly accolades, far more than most of us. They'll be joining us today in conversation about this book, A Lot of People Are Saying. So we trust that you all enjoy this experience. And as always, please send your questions in to the Q&A chat box. As we see them, we promise to ask them about a half hour from now. With that, I want to hand over the floor to these distinguished political theorists to tell us about conspiracy theories and the creation story for this amazing book. Russ and Nancy.
Cordell, thank you for having Nancy and me here, Cordell. We're really happy to be joining you in the Aspen Institute in this new forum, and we're happy to be talking about this book of ours. A lot of people are saying, and it might be worth just talking a little bit, Nancy, about how we got into this. What brought us to this?
Right, it is a good question, Russ, because at the time that we started, conspiracism wasn't much in the news. But I know what prompted me, and you can talk about what prompted you, and that is the day after Trump's inaugural. He had been claiming that he had the largest inaugural crowd in all of history, and the next day, the National Park Service published, as they do always, photos of the inaugural. And the photos showed a rather modest inaugural crowd size. And Trump's immediate and angry response was that the civil servants in the National Park Service had doctored the photos. So this was shocking to me, and it was disorienting. I mean, it was like a kind of assault on reality. There was no evidence of it. It was an assault on our common sense. How does he know that they were doctored? What are we to think of this? And this disorientation really was the motivation for me to want to figure out what was going on here.
You know, disorientation really is the right word to capture. I remember my response to the to the Pizzagate conspiracy, which just preceded that election. It kind of it floated up in September, October 2016, and this was the concoction in which Hillary Clinton and her campaign chairman John Podesta were running a child sex trafficking ring out of the basement of a Washington, D.C. pizzeria. And, you know, as preposterous as it was, it convinced at least one person who showed up with an assault rifle to, quote, self-investigate the allegation, and who entered the pizzeria and fired that assault rifle. That man's in federal prison right now. So these are not inert accusations, even when they seem absurd. And I remember as we were trying to make sense of that and things like it, something like Pizzagate, we came to question whether these two words, conspiracy and theory, should really always be put together. It's hard to say one without the other. There's a conspiracy theory. He's a conspiracy theorist. But we came to realize that what we were looking at in something like Pizzagate was like conspiracy with no theory. It didn't start from an event. Say 9/11 conspiracism starts from this event that's really hard to understand, which is this attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And Pizzagate doesn't start from anything, any event in the world. Again, say looking at 9/11 conspiracism, there's still websites up right now full of putative evidence, full of attempts at marshaling facts from engineering to explain what would have been necessary to bring the towers down. There's no evidence in Pizzagate. And conspiracy theory in its classic form is about holding power to account. It's about outsiders who are really separated from power, trying to make power both legible, readable, understandable, and accountable. And Pizzagate makes the world much more mysterious and doesn't hold power to account. So we're looking at conspiracy with no theory, conspiracy without the theory, which seemed to us to be something different. And I mean, that's at least one new thing. Anything else new that we came across, Nancy?
Yeah, I before I say what else is new, just to underscore what you said, Russ, a conspiracy theory is an explanation of something, and it uses evidence and dots and patterns in order to show that there really is some malignant intent going on. And conspiracy without the theory, what we call conspiracism, dispenses with all of that. It's one word: rigged. The election is rigged. One word does it. And the things that are new that enable and encourage this new conspiracism, I think there are like a few of them. One is that the way you validate a conspiracy claim without any evidence is repetition. And that's the title of our book. A lot of people are saying, you can see Trump and other conspiracists saying, well, I don't know, but a lot of people are saying it, right? It's a sheer assertion or the sort of innuendo. I'm asking questions, I want to know more. The second thing, and this is obvious, is the internet. But I think what we're interested in the way in which the social media on the internet interacts specifically with conspiracy without the theory. You couldn't advance a conspiracy theory, a complicated theory on social media, but you can say rigged 10,000, a million times, right?
Yeah.
One word will do it. So there's
it fits into the 140 character limit.
Exactly. So there's a congruence between aspects of the internet and conspiracy theory. The other thing that's new is that we have conspiracy entrepreneurs, people whose business is to make these things up, to spread them, to raise money from it. They get very rich, like Alex Jones. And these conspiracy theories are picked up and modified. But
the thing about somebody like Alex Jones is he could never have broken in the old communications technology. The producers who decided what went on the air when there were 3 networks plus PBS would never have let him hit the airway. But that gatekeeping function that was exercised by producers and editors who determined, what made it into those valuable column inches of a newspaper, that's been eradicated by this amazing communications technology that allows anybody to say anything to everyone in the whole world. And right now, during this webinar, anybody can tweet something and it can go viral, and it costs nothing to disseminate information. So that I think breakdown of the gatekeeping function in the new communications technology has allowed these conspiracy entrepreneurs to see what generates an audience and to put all kinds of stuff out there.
Right. I think that there's a lot of interest and a lot of good work in the psychology of conspiracism. Who believes these things and why, and how does the mind work that invites you to adopt a conspiracy claim. And there's also been a lot of interest and very good work on the internet and how it fuels it. But what interests us, Russ, is really the politics of this, right? Yeah. What is the significance of it for democracy? And it's surprisingly not the first topic on people's minds. They're much more interested in the sort of technical things. And so if you want to think about what are the consequences of this for democracy, you have to say what else is new. I mean, the big thing that we haven't mentioned really is that we have a president with a conspiracist mindset who has a compromised sense of reality and has the capacity, institutional capacity and otherwise, to impose this compromised sense of reality on the nation.
It's an amazing fact, just that. I mean, we're well into this administration, so it's easy to take for granted, but there's this not very old book called American Conspiracy Theories by a couple of psychologists, a very good book. Is it 2012, Cambridge University, Oxford University Press. And one of the chapters is about how conspiracy theories are for losers, for people who are on the outside of power, who are stuck on the periphery. And I think, until 2016, no one imagined that a conspiracist, someone with a conspiratorial mindset would be in the White House.
Right. You know what we neglected to say as we began our conversation, Russ, is that some conspiracy theories are true. Some conspiracy claims are true. People today, journalists especially, use conspiracy theory as a sort of synonym for something that's bizarre and clearly untrue, and it's not. There are lots of good, true conspiracies, and there are conspiracy theories that have been progressive. I want to make sure we make this clear at the seminar. The whole progressive era, for example, which uncovered corporate monopolies and smoke-filled rooms, right?
Yeah. No, conspiracy theory is like investigative journalism in its classic form. As you say, it deals with evidence. It tries to explain things. It might be convincing, all things considered. It might not, but sometimes it is, and sometimes it's true.
Right.
And there's an important place for it. This stuff, conspiracy without the theory, gives up that important place. It sacrifices it.
Exactly right. So we're interested in the politics. That is the consequences for democracy. We call this an assault on democracy. And I think that besides disorientation, which is bad enough, you don't want a citizenry that's completely disoriented. What we've seen, and it's escalating, and it's almost everywhere now, is that conspiracist claims are used to delegitimate the foundational institutions of democracy. I think it started with the delegitimation of knowledge-producing institutions. Remember the attacks on the FBI or the climate scientists or the EPA. And today we're seeing the same kind of conspiracist attacks on epidemiologists and doctors in the middle of a pandemic. You all probably read about this Michael Caputo, who was a spokesman for the cabinet department in charge of overseeing the coronavirus report. And he describes these scientists as traitors, as a resistance unit within the CDC. And so what you're seeing is a delegitimation.
It was amazing, by the way. It was amazing. It was amazing he really, crystallized this. This goes back to the Park Service thing that you mentioned, this idea that there's a conspiracy of civil servants who are machinating to defeat the president from inside the executive agencies that report to the president.
Right. So given this delegitimation of knowledge-producing institutions, I would say two things. One is, perhaps this is so obvious, but now it needs to be said, that government in a modern state needs knowledge-producing institutions. It needs people with specialized knowledge in every area from economic to climate. And without it, we can't have a functioning government as we see. So that's the first additional point I'd want to make. And then just one other is that to define what it means to say that they are delegitimized, because people tend to use the term legitimacy or illegitimacy synonymously with mistrust. And I think what's going on is much more dangerous even than fostering public mistrust in these institutions. When you delegitimate a person or an institution, you're really saying that that person no longer has any meaning or any value or any authority, that they have no call for your consent or even your compliance. And when that happens with knowledge-producing institutions in a democracy, you begin to have a government that can't function at all.
That's right, yeah, because that they provide the elemental facts that elected officials and others in government use to make decisions, like the economists at the Bureau of Labor Statistics who come up with the unemployment rate. I mean, Trump accused them of of conspiring to make the unemployment rate look lower than it really was in the Obama administration. If we no longer can accept the numbers they come up with, can't make decisions about basic economic policy. And apart from, the delegitimation of those institutions, knowledge-producing institutions, whether they're kind of science-based institutions and executive agencies or courts, there's also the delegitimation of another institution that I can't imagine modern democracy being, working without, which is parties. People don't like parties in many cases, but what parties do is try to contest elections. They try to bring people together for the sake, an opposition party tries to bring people together for the sake of contesting and ultimately overturning whatever party's in power. And democracy only works if we view both our own party and the other party, all parties, as legitimate contenders to the political contest. And that, if they win an election, deserve to hold an office. And what we see is, an effort to paint the opposition party as not merely mistaken or misfounded, but as an enemy, as an existential threat. This is the kind of thing that Pizzagate began to do in 2016. Hillary Clinton wasn't just the less worthy candidate, she was the repository of all evil. She was worse than a Nazi. Who would torture children and sexually traffic in children, but somebody purely evil? And of course, a slogan like "lock her up" doesn't do much to engender a sense that the opposition, however wrong-headed, is legitimate and deserves to occupy powerful offices if it wins an election. And this goes right along with the kind of sly joking about not turning over power if he loses, and the very coy invocations to violence. And so this kind of delegitimation of a party and the very idea of a peaceful, organized opposition gets at the core, the fundamental, the elemental, I should say, institution of democracy.
That's right, Russ. And I just want to repeat it and underscore it because it's so important, both historically and in the present. That is the invention of political parties in representative democracy really was a miraculous and miraculous invention. It was a heroic invention, and it requires a kind of heroic discipline, right?
Yeah.
To see the opposition as a loyal opposition. But the importance of it was that you had regular transitions of power, that one government didn't turn into another out of violence or cabal or conspiracy, but through the votes of people in free and fair elections. It really is an extraordinary, and we see a vulnerable thing.
Yeah.
Because it requires so much discipline, self-discipline, to accept that your party is, as the term suggests, just a part, right?
Right.
That it will never represent everybody, that it can't claim to be the voice of all the people. And more than that, that we don't want it to. That is, that political pluralism and this kind of waiting in the wings of the opposition so that you can one day run a government is, and I'm going to use the word for the third time, a kind of heroic thing.
And there are these two ideas. Conspiracism maps on, destroys this, assaults this elemental institution in two ways. It paints the opposition party as itself a conspiracy bent on destroying the country. It's an enemy, not an opposition. And it describes the electoral process itself as distorted by a conspiratorial, cabal that's rigged the election. And that's that one word conspiracy, rigged, exclamation point, back again. And it's at work right now in this election. Right.
So if you looked at the polls that used to ask people, would you be unhappy if your daughter married someone of the opposite party, right? And so a considerable number of people would be unhappy. The polls now ask, why would you be unhappy? Do you fear the other party? And it's a matter of fear, not a matter of complementarity of attitudes and opinions. So I think that we have really seen an escalation, not only in the attempt to delegitimate the opposition, but the terms in which you do it. For a long time, really from after his first State of the Union address, Trump talked about Democrats as traitors. You remember that. They wouldn't clap at his State of the Union. He says, maybe they're disloyal. Some people say they're traitors. Now they are, the accusation is that they are violent conspiracists, that they're anarchists, that they're agitators. And there is, I believe, an encouragement of rogue violence against them.
It's halting. It's halting. And as you know, as Cordell said, when we started this, we were trying to chart this. It was happening right before our eyes. It was something new, and we weren't sure whether what we were charting was would remain, you know, a resilient feature of the political world. Here we are, a couple of years later, and it's enveloping our politics.
And endangering both our lives with the pandemic and our elections with the instilling of the belief that these elections will be rigged and that the only way that the Republicans can lose is if it's rigged. So we're facing really quite a crisis, I think. On the other hand, let me say something optimistic. Russ,
Yeah.
I wrote a column a while ago called Reality Bites, right? Because there's a sense in which reality has come back, and those people who were never convinced about conspiracism have sort of gotten more of a backbone and are inspired to bite back. And the question really is going to be, can reality bite back hard enough? We have this rogue violence even over masks, which has become a political issue, and now over the election, and we'll see.
Yeah, there's this, I mean, you could think of conspiracism as an effort by, and the way it's deployed by Trump, it's an effort to remove facts in the world that he would rather the world not have. And so if there's a virus that's interrupting you know, economic growth, he would rather make the virus disappear by calling it a hoax. And that was, you know, his first instinct back in February. And you know, to describe it as a hoax perpetrated by Democrats to shut down the economy and imperil his reelection chances. And that kind of conspiracy, it didn't work. I mean, it got no traction whatsoever because the reality of the virus infecting people and killing people bit back. So he couldn't convince people that it was a hoax when it was killing people. And that's the question, you know, can the reality of things check this kind of conspiratorial fiction, these conspiratorial fantasies and fabrications, and limit how much they spread and how many people buy into them. Reality bit back, I think, with pandemic conspiracism, at least some parts of it. Will it bite back more generally? Can it bite back hard enough to stop this conspiracism before it really does a lot of damage to basic democratic institutions? So that's the question.
Russ, maybe we should say something about all of these people who assent to these conspiracy theories and or conspiracy claims, not theory.
Yeah.
I should learn my own book title. And the and the fact that they're not, the belief is the wrong way to think about this, right? That the people who won't wear masks, that the people who respond to Trump saying, liberate Wisconsin or liberate Michigan or whatever, what he was saying, what's going on in their heads? And it's not that they believe that the virus doesn't exist. It's not a matter of objective evidence of any kind. They're doing something else in assenting to these conspiracy claims and repeating them and retweeting them and so on and so forth. So what is it that we think there is actually being expressed here? It's not that there's no COVID-19. What is it?
Yeah, and it's, right, so it's not like cognitive conviction in the, you know, truth of a set of propositions. It has more to do with the satisfactions of repeating something. And I think those satisfactions are in some sense political and partisan. The satisfaction of repeating things that upset the opposition. Just disturbing and upsetting the opposition, I think, can be deeply satisfying.
It's an act of aggression. It's an act of aggression. It's
an act of aggression, yeah. And of course, I think, you know, there's a sense that some of these will disable the opposition, will disable, you know, the Democrats. So, I mean, again, it runs into reality when it becomes a sort of conspiracism about mask wearing.
Right. I think that if it's not belief in the fact of the matter, you're saying, those who assent to it are saying that it's true enough, meaning that there's some deeper underlying truth here. And the deeper underlying truth is that a cabal is trying to unseat Trump. And when you assent to these things, you're identifying with this deeper truth, and you're identifying with other people who agree with you. There is a collective we created by conspiracy claims today. And being loyal to that we is as important as whether you actually believe that there is no virus or that it can't be easily spread by people who don't wear masks.
Here's a question, Nancy, from William. What factors account for why some conspiracy narratives go viral and others don't, apart from Trump retweeting them? And I'll just say, I wish I could know what accounts for it, because when I first encountered QAnon, and that was before it was, I think, a very notable phenomenon. We were reading the 4chan message board
4chan, right.
A couple summers ago. I would have guessed that was going to remain fairly invisible and on the fringes of politics. I wouldn't have guessed that this story that with all sorts of this mashup, which includes everything from George Soros and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, child sex trafficking, Pizzagate's back in it, JFK Jr. is going to rise from the dead. I would have thought that would go nowhere, and yet it's commanding the sort of affiliation of people who are winning primaries for congressional elections, and you might even call it kind of a faction within the Republican Party today. So I don't know that I'm particularly good at predicting what's gonna really work.
Well, if we look at some of the characteristics of QAnon and try to generalize from it, maybe we can get some ideas. I mean, there are some elements to historically lasting conspiracy theories. One is that there's usually an enemy that's linked to sexual degeneracy, and that's going on here, right? There's an enemy that's undeserving in the sense that they should be jailed for sure or certainly die, that there's suggestions of violence against the enemy, as there clearly is with QAnon, where they say these people really need to be eliminated, and they play on the word eliminated, right? Whether they're going to kill them all or whatever. And the other aspect interesting in QAnon, and I think is true of all great historical conspiracy theories, is that it's prophetic, that it's apocalyptic. The QAnon speak about the show, that this moment is going to come where, Phoenix is going to rise from the ashes and the sinners are going to go to hell and so on. And so I think that the lasting ones have certain characteristics that we can generalize from. And of course, the most important is the one that Russ began with, which is that there's a kind of political partisan side to it.
Is there a parallel, this is from Steve Goldband, is there a parallel between conspiracies and other areas of mass thought, emotional convergence, thinking of sports fans and the avidly religious? Is there a parallel between conspiracy and sports or religion? And I mean, I do think, I guess we use the example in the book of when we're thinking about what people say versus what people believe. And I was thinking back to being a graduate student, walking over to Fenway Park in the afternoon to watch a game on Saturday, and as I'd walk over the bridge, I'd pass this guy selling Yankees Sucks t-shirts. And in those years, the Yankees were by far the best team in baseball. And I would think to myself, well, that's weird because they don't suck. I mean, I understand not liking them, not wanting them to win, and but just it became kind of a chant and a mantra, and Red Sox fans, repeated it, not because they literally thought the Yankees were bad at baseball, that they sucked in that respect. Maybe sucked in some moral sense, I don't know, but But it didn't really have to do with the content, the proposition at all. It just had to do with the team spirit and the satisfaction of joining in that team spirit. And I think that, I think that there may be a lot of that too. What motivates somebody to repeat these sorts of more partisan conspiratorial concoctions? Religion is a more complicated thing, but I tend to situate that more in the realm of the respectable, and it depends, I guess, on the religion, but it's something that might help people make sense of the world and navigate it.
I think the questioner is getting at something really important and true, which is that there is this human propensity to create us and them, we and others. And sports is an obvious example, and religion is too. And the other is identified with something that's more negative, something you don't want to be, sometimes even an enemy. But if you look at all the sort of social manifestations of this us against them, or this we, this team, conspiracism stands out, first of all, because it's political, but more importantly, because it has always a specific content. And the content is that this opposition, this other, has covert plans of destruction, and that we have to find all of the dots and patterns to identify these malignant people, their plan, and to stop it.
Here are a couple more questions. What can the general public do to stop the spread of unfounded conspiracy theories? What what pressure might be put on social media entities like YouTube and Twitter, and how do we contain it? Is there something that can be done to contain it? From Alan and Trey. And what do you think?
Well, we took that up at the end of the first edition of this book, and I wonder if we've changed our minds some about it. One of the things we talked about was the importance of speaking truth to conspiracy. And at that time, we had the sense that people surrounding Trump, Republican elected officials and other Republicans, who presumably had the confidence of those who accepted this conspiracism, that they would dissent, that they wouldn't remain mute, that they couldn't stand by and watch the coronavirus, right, being described as a hoax. But that turns out to have been wrong. It's
amazing, though, how much we expected that would happen. Right. Not that many years ago.
And I don't know how much of it is cynicism and how much is submissiveness. We see this in other countries where democracy is threatened, where the opposition just stays quiet, but usually they stay quiet because they'll be jailed or put to death if they don't.
Yeah.
So this is what we first thought would happen, and we were wrong.
And within politics, I think what will contain this is politically ambitious people learning that this is not a reliable path to power. Trump is setting an example, and people are studying that example. People smarter. Trump may be a genius in certain intuitive respects, but there are other people like Tom Cotton watching his example, wondering if this is a tool that can be used to win the presidency. And the answer to that, I think, will be decided in large measure in the next couple months. And if this tool looks like it's a path to a landslide defeat, that I think politically ambitious people who want to win the presidency and other offices will shy away from using it in at least the really surprising ways that Trump has. Another related to the question is, what can these platforms, these sort of content neutral platforms like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook do? And they've adopted, historically they had a kind of hands-off a policy. We're just a platform. We're not a gatekeeper. And that's, what really differentiated them from something like the New York Times, which didn't just print whatever came in. And just as we are publishing the book, some of these platforms adopted a more of an editorial policy for the first time. And for instance, Alex Jones was deplatformed. And that sharply restricted his reach and I think his influence. And so it may be that I don't think it's impossible that a gatekeeping function might be recreated. And I think that they're very, very gingerly at Facebook, very gingerly tiptoeing into this. They don't really want to take any responsibility for the content of what's on their platform, but they may have to. And there are any number of ways that they might figure out how to, that are new and make use of technologies that have, been maybe yet to be discovered.
I do want to go back to our first assumption that speaking truth to conspiracism would be important, and how we were discouraged by the fact that officials didn't. But I do think that speaking truth to conspiracism, just like fact checking about ordinary lies, has been absolutely necessary and has worked in some ways. That is, it's worked for the rest of the population, the non-conspiracist population. It's given people backbone, it's addressed their disorientation, it's given them sort of moral propulsion.
Yeah.
And it has had some effect. I mean, Caputo, this guy who claims that the CDC has a resistance movement within it, was forced to resign,
yeah,
to take leave. And DeJoy at the post office has had to backtrack.
Yeah.
And that leads to another.
It combats disorientation, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, so you might think that there are these sort of three elements. There's a conspiracy entrepreneur who either invents or really disseminates a particular accusation. So there's one person really who very actively disseminated Pizzagate back in 2016. It was good for traffic to her website, she said. She wasn't sure she believed it. Then there's another population of those who repeat it. And they may say, I don't know, if it's true or false. I just think it's there may be something there. And there may be individuals who like something, who forward something, who retweet something. And they may be public officials who repeat something. So there are the repeaters. And then there's the broad audience, the audience of listeners and watchers who are trying to make sense of things. And that's where I think the action is. I don't think anything we do or anything anyone does is going to change the conspiracy entrepreneur who very well might believe this stuff. Those individuals, I don't know what Alex Jones believes, but he very well might believe this stuff. He kind of confessed in deposition to not believing it, but the more you read interviews with him, the more you realize he's got a very labile mind. And he slides into believing some wacky stuff. So there might be some sort of condition that afflicts him. The repeaters don't have that conviction. They're repeating it in the way that Red Sox fans repeat Yankees suck. And then there's just the audience who don't know what team to root for and are trying to make sense of things. That's where the action is. That's where I think you and I, Nancy, are trying to have an effect. We're trying to combat disorientation and call attention to the delegitimation of foundational democratic institutions so that that broad audience of citizens and sometimes officials can stand up to it.
Right. There's one other element at work today. It may have taken a while to organize, but it is at work. That is, we don't just have the communicators and the audience, with nothing in between. America has a robust civil society, and these associations of civil society have begun to be organized to speak truth in certain ways, to have their members active. Election law, for example, on this business of voter fraud has become a legal specialty. And there are hundreds and hundreds of lawyers who bring cases and who state the facts about voter fraud. So I think that it has taken some years, but we have gotten the mobilization of the great strength of the United States, as far as I'm concerned, which is these voluntary associations of civil society, and they have taken action now.
What do you think about a media literacy course as part of a new civics education for 8th graders?
My daughter lives in Denver, and my 2 grandkids are using media all the time. And in order to prove to them that they can't believe what they read, she doctored something so that she, for 24 hours, was the mayor of Denver. Yeah, I mean, I think that's important, but I think that as long as the stuff on these platforms is as venomous and destructive as it is. I mean, and it's been much more destructive abroad than it has here. You know, the Facebook, there's all kinds of articles on Facebook having really helped propel civil wars and genocides abroad because people have used these platforms to do just that. So I think there is a danger. On the other hand, the notion of public regulation is troublesome to libertarians. So it's this is a hard one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that needs to be part of a civic education, but I do think that I'd love to see, you know, a wider appreciation for what really goes on in something like a knowledge producing institution, whether it's a court or whether it's a scientific practice or whether it's a bureaucratic agency like the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's not like we just have this big sort of reservoir of facts and you know, we guard them and we print them and we publish them. It's rather that it's a process. It's not like knowledge is contained by all these facts. Knowledge comes from following a certain kind of process of you know, of making a hypothesis, of testing, of corroborating, and of putting
and of self-correcting.
Yeah, self-correcting, and whether it's the process of criminal law or it's the process of chemistry, it's the process that gives us some confidence, but never perfect confidence, in the conclusions that are always provisional and subject to, you know, further testing and correction, and I think that's the, you know, that's the thing I'd love to be, you know, to cultivate a wider appreciation of. I don't want to say all scientists should have authority, you know, all experts should have authority. Experts can be wrong. They suggested, you know, a lot of experts thought invading Iraq was a swell idea. I mean, experts can be woefully wrong. I think what we want to place value in and protect are the processes by which we try to understand how many people are unemployed in the United States. Not the authority of some particular economist. Right.
The sub-ground, the sort of floor beneath what you want, which we used to call enlightenment, right? The floor beneath it is, and here's where I think civic education might very well enter, is understanding what it is the government does. I remember when the Tea Party woman said, "I want the government to get its hands off my Medicare." And we learned then that people don't know what government does and what goes into policy making. So it's not just about an appreciation of specialized knowledge. It's also an appreciation of what government does. And civic education now, you know, when it's sort of in its standard form, is the Constitution and the elements of government and so on, but nothing to tell us how dependent we all are on the decisions the government makes and how they really do envelop all of our lives. And that's not to say that what we want is laissez-faire. It's just to say that we all do want roads and healthcare.
Here are a couple, you know, here's a comment for a couple of political theorists. Modern conspiracists often engage the world through a Nietzschean lens. and here's another one. I believe and act by it, then it's the going truth, even if facts don't agree. How do we engage with such a perspective? And I guess I take from both of those comments this suggestion that what's underneath this is a certain kind of will to power, that you know, denial in an external world of facts and events that serve as constraints on human action and compel us to approach the world with a certain kind of humility, or at least respect for what we can't reshape according to our, you know, desires. And you know, I think this is the authoritarian heart of the conspiracism that we're describing. This is why it's an assault on democracy.
It is, and I think that's what the Nietzsche reference is, that it is about the will to power. But Nietzsche would say it's also nihilism. And that's a very interesting question for us now to assess what's going on here. Is this a trend to authoritarianism? If it is, it's not nihilistic and it's not Nietzschean, right? It's an ideology and a program of action with certain goals of setting up certain kind of regime. On the other hand, you could think that really this is without a determined politics. This is being led by a president with has his own very deep needs and sense of reality, and he cannot bear having his reality challenged or not put into effect. And that's not quite authoritarianism. It's destructive. We wrote a whole book about its destructiveness, but it's not political in that way.
Yeah, so this is something that we say in the book, that it's, that conspiracy without the theory lacks the theory in two senses. It lacks an explanatory theory, and it lacks theory as a kind of ideology or philosophy of politics, that there's no real philosophy of politics underneath it. There's no redemption. And some of the critics of our book, really wondered whether this is nihilistic as we described it as being, and as whether it really did lack a program, or whether it was really being driven by a certain kind of conservative politics or conservative program. And so I guess that sort of does raise the question: is conspiracism more friendly to the conservative cause or than to the progressive or the liberal cause? And is it coming mainly from Republicans?
Well, it is coming from the right today, but I don't know that conspiracism is by its nature friendly to the conservative cause. I mean, this is because it's about delegitimating institutions in the opposition, and it's more conservatives who are anti-government. They want as little government as you can get, and so there's a complementarity between a conservative program and the nutty conspiracism of our president, right? But I don't think conspiracism by nature is conservative or Republican. There have been lots of progressives, and the left has its conspiracism too. But there is a difference. I think that the conspiracism coming from the left tends to be old-fashioned conspiracy theory. Here are the dots, here are the patterns, here's the evidence. If you watch Rachel Maddow in the early years of the Trump administration, going through all of the evidence of Trump's relationship with the Russians and with Putin, trying to explain it, right? This was an attempt at research conspiracy. And that's the old-fashioned kind, right? The dots, the patterns, and the evidence.
But I wouldn't be at all surprised to see a left-wing demagogue use exactly these tools. And they're available to a left-wing demagogue, and I think they could be used. And as you say, conservatism as a real philosophy of government doesn't get much leverage from this, because the erasure of facts, the erasure of a world of facts and events would incapacitate a conservative government just as thoroughly as it would a progressive government. So real conservatives
yes,
would not find their purposes served by this. But power seekers of a different sort, coming from the left or the right, very well might. I see a few more questions here for us, Nancy. Does domination of Washington D.C. by extremists, whether they're progressive or conservative, fuel conspiracy theories about the national government? And that's, I think that's the classic understanding of conspiracism, that it's at home with those who are on the periphery, who are really, really removed from power, and who don't understand, therefore, how power works, have no familiarity with it, and for whom, but who are on the receiving end of its workings. And it functions as a way to make power legible. That's not this stuff. I don't think Pizzagate, does Pizzagate make Washington D.C. more understandable? I mean, this rigged, I don't see how the array of conspiratorial allegations that have no theory underneath them at all help, either disempower Washington D.C. elites or explain it. What do you think? How about the deep state conspiracy? Does that somehow serve the needs of those who feel locked out of the DC power structure?
Well, today it's operating to explain why there is resistance to Trump on the part of the opposition, why there's a Mueller investigation. But the questioner seems to have suggested that there's right now a symmetry between right-wing and left-wing extremists, and I think that that's just not the case if we look at what's going on in politics today. I don't think the Democratic Party, and there's a great deal of political science on this, on how the Republican Party has election after election moved farther in an extreme direction, and the Democrats really have not.
I had somebody call me the other day who said that she has a good friend who's sort of consumed, social media that is propagating these conspiratorial concoctions, and the friend has kind of gone down the conspiratorial rabbit hole. And she said, what do I do? What can I say to this friend to change his mind? And I'm curious whether your answer would be the same as mine. My answer was nothing. You can't do anything to change his mind.
No, I think that that's basically right. But I have heard people answer that question by proposing some of the measures that are taken to remove a person from a religious cult, right? And there is a whole industry, leaving aside the kidnapping of the cult member, of what are the steps that you take when somebody has gone down this kind of rabbit hole. And there is a whole sort of formula of counter indoctrination and getting them back into the relationships of ordinary life and off their computer or, whatever. But I think that in terms of friend to friend and how you can convince them that they're wrong.
That's right. But what it does remind me of is how the new conspiracism functions to eradicate all uncertainty and ambivalence. And when it comes to politics, all of our convictions, all of our beliefs ought to have some uncertainty attached to them. If you think about your belief on a scale of 0 to 100, where 100% is the confidence that I know my name, my birthday, my phone number, 0 is I don't know anything. When it comes to policies and programs and political purposes, maybe I get to 70 or 80. Some things I'm super sure of. Is the Affordable Care Act the right way to provision health care in the United States of America? It's 75 or so. There's always some doubt. And what conspiracism does is it eradicates that doubt. And it takes the opposition that's arguing against the things you believe, and it converts it from an opposition that's motivated by reasons and some reading of the world and what works in the world into an enemy that isn't motivated by anything decent or anything legitimate. And once your opposition becomes that, you don't have to take stock of it as an opposition at all. You don't have to wonder why reasonable people might disagree with the stuff that you think.
Right.
And you can become totally certain.
Right. And the incarnation of that is the very successful propagation of the notion that mainstream media is fake news.
Yeah.
There's no recourse or resource outside of the news that the conspiracists agree on.
Right. So that was actually brilliant. Converting that appellation, fake news, into a conspiracy charge was actually a brilliant thing. So fake news starts out as literally news that is fake. It's misinformation that intends to,
it's deliberately. Right.
Deliberate, yeah. And then it's used to refer to the New York Times as a conspiracy that's basically motivated by political purposes and publishing things that are false to serve those purposes. So that just, that's what really assaults, the understanding that there's any kind of process underneath, the practice of journalism.
Maybe we should ask Cordell if he has any questions for us. I know he's been...
What do you think, Cordell?
I do. I'm a parent of a teenager, and my spouse and I watch the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. And I don't know if you all have seen this. Please view it. It's 94 minutes. That's going to terrify you. And the basic premise is this, that the human brain, this 2 million-year-old brain that all of us have, is no match for the machines behind the power of the algorithms of our social media platforms. And there's a good reason people believe things that aren't true. And I just wonder if we're at an entirely different, more dangerous place with conspiracy theories because of social media and the fact that you could literally every suggested video builds upon the previous one, and it almost predicts what you'll be interested in next because they understand you better than you understand you. It's a terrifying thought. I'm just wondering your perspective on that as we close out.
I don't actually think that even the brilliant algorithms of social media can necessarily defeat the power of skepticism, the power that comes from an ability to ask critical questions about information, about arguments that are presented to you, and this power, I mean, the power of skepticism and the power to ask critical questions requires a little bit of training. And it's the point of a certain kind of education, maybe the civic education that we really need. Yes. But no, I guess I don't think that, even, Nancy, what do you think about this? That skepticism, the skepticism that we're trying to keep alive in this book, we're trying to invigorate, I guess I should say, it originates not in some sort of elite education that only a few could, it originates in common sense. And I think Nancy and I both have a faith, I'm going to call it a faith, in the common sense of our neighbors, of our democratic citizens, and that common sense is going to be the source of the kind of skepticism and questioning that can fight back against even the best algorithm.
I agree, and I would answer Cordell in a little bit of a different way as well, which is that I think that the political centrality of conspiracism is likely to wane when this administration is over, partly for the reasons that Russ is saying. My fear is very different. My fear is that there has been a successful delegitimation of institutions for large numbers of Americans, even who aren't conspiracists. And we know something, social scientists know quite a bit about how democracy became legitimated historically and still today. And we're watching how democracies become delegitimated. What we have absolutely no experience with or don't know how to do is how to re-legitimate institutions that have lost their meaning and value and authority. And that's what I'm worried about.
There's the task.
Well, Russ and Nancy, thank you all so much for this invigorating and sometimes scary conversation. We bid you well in your quest of keeping skepticism alive. Ladies and gentlemen who are listening today, this book, People Are Saying, can be purchased anywhere where you buy books. And so I strongly advise you all to go out and get this well thought out study on our system. Thank you again for joining us. Next week, we have Steve Grossman of Harvard's Inner City and Competitive Council joining us. And then on October the 8th, we have award-winning author Shaka Booker of the Broad Foundation on to talk about career planning. Thank you all again. Have an amazing weekend, and let's keep skepticism alive. Thank you.
Thanks, Cordell.
Right on, Cordell.